There is a reflex in your body that most people have never heard of. It is called the bitter taste reflex, and it is one of the most underutilized biological mechanisms available to support liver health, bile production, and fat metabolism in the human body. When bitter compounds make contact with receptors on your tongue, a signal travels immediately to your brainstem. Your brainstem sends a command through the vagus nerve to your liver, your gallbladder, and your digestive system. Bile production increases, digestive enzyme secretion begins, gastric acid output rises. Your liver shifts toward a more active metabolic state before you have swallowed a single thing. This is established physiology. It is the same mechanism that makes dandelion root, gentian, artichoke extract, and apple cider vinegar relevant to liver and digestive health. And it is why bitter morning drinks have been used in traditional medicine cultures across the world for centuries before anyone had the tools to measure what was actually happening. Today I want to explain what the research says about the specific compounds in common bitter kitchen ingredients and what they do at the liver level, with honesty about where the evidence is strong and where it is still developing. I am Ethan Corvin, a health educator and cardiovascular research communicator. Before we start, drop a comment. Do you eat or drink anything bitter in the morning deliberately? Tell me what it is below. Let us get into it. The bitter taste reflex. Most people associate bitterness with something unpleasant to avoid. Evolutionarily, that makes sense. Many toxic plants are bitter, and the aversion to bitterness was a protective mechanism. But here is what is interesting. Your body did not just evolve a warning system for bitterness, it evolved an entire response program. Because some bitter plants were also medicinal, and the compounds that made them bitter were also the compounds that supported digestion, liver function, and metabolic processing. Your tongue has specialized taste receptor cells called type 2 taste receptor cells, which express proteins called TAS2R receptors. There are 25 different TAS2R subtypes, each responsive to different bitter compounds. When bitter molecules bind to these receptors, the signal travels through the chorda tympani nerve to the nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem, and from there, through the vagus nerve to the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and stomach. This activation triggers what is called the cephalic phase digestive response. Bile secretion increases, gastric acid production rises, pancreatic enzyme output begins, the liver shifts into a more active processing state. This entire response happens in seconds, before the bitter compound even reaches the stomach. For someone with a sluggish liver, poor bile flow, or early fatty liver disease, consistently activating this reflex with morning bitter intake is a meaningful and mechanistically grounded daily practice. What makes a good bitter tonic? Not all bitter things produce the same response or the same biological benefit. The bitterness of coffee, for example, comes primarily from caffeine and chlorogenic acids, which have their own documented health effects but activate the bitter reflex differently than the medicinal bitter compounds called bitter gentians or bitter iridoids. The most well-researched bitter compounds for liver support are the following. Dandelion root contains bitter iridoid compounds, including taraxacin and taraxacerin. These compounds have demonstrated bile-stimulating activity in multiple studies. A study published in Phytotherapy Research found that dandelion root extract significantly increased bile secretion in research models. Bile is the liver's primary tool for excreting cholesterol and fat-soluble waste. When bile flow is increased, cholesterol excretion improves and fat metabolism in the digestive system becomes more efficient. Artichoke leaf contains cynerin and chlorogenic acid. Cynerin is one of the most studied bitter compounds for liver support. A systematic review in the journal Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics analyzed clinical trials on artichoke leaf extract and liver function. The review found consistent improvements in liver enzyme markers, specifically ALT and AST, and in total cholesterol in participants with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Apple cider vinegar contains acetic acid, which activates some of the same bitter receptors and has additional documented effects through a separate mechanism. Acetic acid inhibits fat accumulation in the liver through activation of AMP-activated protein kinase, sometimes called AMPK, which is an enzyme that regulates fat oxidation in liver cells. A study in bioscience. Biotechnology and biochemistry showed that acetic acid reduced liver fat accumulation and body fat in research participants. Turmeric, while not primarily bitter, contains curcumin, which has documented effects on hepatic NF-κB pathways, reducing the inflammatory signaling that drives progressive liver damage in fatty liver disease. It also enhances bile production and supports the same bile flow mechanism as the classical bitter herbs. Lemon juice provides citrate, which we covered in detail in the clove and lemon video. Its relevance here is the bile flow support through citric acid. Ginger provides gingerol, which activates PPAR-alpha in liver cells, shifting them toward fat oxidation rather than fat accumulation. A morning bitter tonic that combines several of these compounds is addressing liver fat metabolism, bile flow, hepatic inflammation, and the bitter taste reflex simultaneously. The recipe with the strongest compound profile. Here is the preparation that delivers the best combination of the compounds I just described in a single morning drink. In 1 cup of warm water, combine the following: 1 tablespoon of raw unfiltered apple cider vinegar. This delivers acetic acid for AMPK activation and bile stimulation. Raw unfiltered retains the mother, which contains beneficial bacterial compounds, though the primary active ingredient, acetic acid, is present in filtered versions as well. Half a fresh lemon squeezed. This adds citrate for bile flow and kidney stone protection, plus hesperidin and naringenin for endothelial and insulin sensitivity support. Half a teaspoon of turmeric powder. This adds curcumin for hepatic anti-inflammatory support. Curcumin's bioavailability is significantly enhanced by the presence of piperine, adding a small pinch of black pepper, just 1 or 2 grinds. Increases curcumin absorption by up to 2,000% according to research published in Planta Medica. A small piece of fresh ginger root, approximately 1 centimeter, grated or finely sliced. This adds gingerol for PPAR-alpha liver fat oxidation activation. Optional but worth adding if available. 1 teaspoon of dandelion root powder or a strong brewed dandelion root tea used as the base instead of plain water. This adds the classical bitter iridoid compounds for maximum bitter taste reflex activation and bile stimulation. 1 teaspoon of raw honey. This is not for sweetness only. Raw honey contains small amounts of polyphenols and antimicrobial compounds. More practically, it makes the drink palatable enough to consume consistently. And consistency is what determines whether any of these mechanisms actually have a meaningful effect on your liver over weeks and months. Stir well and drink slowly in the morning before breakfast on a relatively empty stomach. The empty stomach maximizes the cephalic phase bitter reflex response and positions the compounds to be present when the first meal's fat metabolism begins. Drink slowly over 5 to 10 minutes. The bitter taste reflex requires adequate contact time between the bitter compounds and the tongue receptors to produce the full vagal activation response. What happens at the liver level? Let me walk through what is happening inside the liver specifically when this combination arrives. The bitter taste reflex, activated in the seconds after the first sip, has already signaled through the vagus nerve. The liver is preparing bile. The gallbladder is preparing to release stored bile into the duodenum. The digestive system is primed. As the compounds are absorbed through the upper gastrointestinal tract, the most significant liver-level effects are the following: AMPK activation from acetic acid. AMPK is often called the master metabolic switch of the cell. When activated, it increases fat oxidation, reduces fat synthesis, and improves insulin sensitivity in liver cells. This is the same cellular pathway activated by the diabetes medication metformin, though acetic acid achieves this effect through dietary means at significantly lower potency. PPAR-alpha activation from gingerol. PPAR-alpha upregulates the genes responsible for mitochondrial fat oxidation in hepatocytes. Fat that was being stored is redirected toward being burned for energy. This is the specific mechanism that reduces hepatic triglyceride accumulation over consistent daily use. Bile flow increase from the bitter compounds and citrate. Increased bile flow means faster removal of cholesterol from the liver, more efficient fat digestion in the intestines, and reduced bile stasis, which is the backing up and concentration of bile that contributes to gallstone formation over time. Curcumin's NF-κB inhibition. NF-κB is a master transcription factor that regulates inflammatory gene expression. In fatty liver disease, NF-κB-driven inflammation in liver cells is what transforms simple fat accumulation into the more damaging inflammatory stage called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Curcumin reduces this inflammatory signaling, protecting liver cells from the progression of damage. These four mechanisms are occurring simultaneously from a single morning drink. None of them is a treatment for liver disease. Each of them is a real, documented, mechanism-level interaction with the biological processes that determine liver fat accumulation and liver health over time. Realistic expectations and timeline. I want to be direct about this because the 60-second claim in some video titles is not realistic physiology. The bitter taste reflex response is immediate. Within 30 to 60 seconds of consuming bitter compounds, the vagal activation and bile stimulation are occurring. This part is genuinely fast. However, changes in liver fat content are not visible in 60 seconds. They are not visible in 1 week. The human liver accumulates fat over months and years. And meaningful reductions in hepatic fat content in human studies typically require 8 to 12 weeks of consistent dietary or lifestyle intervention before measurable changes appear on imaging studies. What people may notice in the first 2 to 4 weeks of consistent morning bitter tonic use is improved digestion after meals, reduced post-meal bloating, and improved bowel regularity, because the bile flow stimulation is having an immediate functional effect on fat digestion and gut motility. Changes in liver enzyme markers, specifically ALT and AST, which indicate liver cell stress, are typically measurable at the 8 to 12 week mark in well-designed human studies. Changes in body composition and visible belly fat reduction, if they occur, are the result of the cumulative metabolic effects and typically require 3 to 6 months of consistent practice combined with dietary improvements. Anyone claiming their liver empties in 60 seconds is using dramatically compressed language that does not reflect the biological reality. The mechanisms are real. The timeline is months, not seconds. Who should be careful? Apple cider vinegar at daily doses can affect tooth enamel. Always drink through a straw or rinse with plain water immediately afterward. Turmeric and curcumin can interact with blood-thinning medications. Anyone on warfarin, clopidogrel, or other anticoagulants should discuss regular high-dose curcumin use with their physician. Dandelion root can increase bile secretion significantly enough that people with active gallstones should use it cautiously and with physician awareness. Increased bile flow in the presence of gallstones can occasionally trigger discomfort. Apple cider vinegar on an empty stomach can cause gastric irritation in people with sensitive stomachs or active gastric ulcer disease. Start with a smaller amount, half a teaspoon, and increase gradually. For healthy adults with no specific contraindications, this morning tonic at the amounts described is safe, well tolerated, and mechanistically supported. Closing. Here's what I want you to take from today. The bitter taste reflex is a real, documented biological response that activates liver preparation, bile secretion, and digestive readiness within seconds of bitter compound exposure. It is not a wellness trend. It is established physiology. The specific compounds in this morning tonic: acetic acid, gingerol, curcumin, citrate, and bitter iridoids where available, each have documented mechanisms of action at the liver level. AMPK activation, PPAR alpha upregulation, NFKB inhibition, and bile flow stimulation are 4 independent liver supportive pathways being addressed simultaneously. Consistent daily use over 8 to 12 weeks is what the research timeline supports for measurable changes in liver enzyme markers. Consistent daily use over 3 to 6 months is the realistic window for changes in body composition. Make this drink tomorrow morning. Drink it before breakfast, drink it slowly, give it 3 months before you judge whether it is working. Drop a comment below. Are you going to try this? And if you already do something similar in the morning, tell me exactly what is in it. Your experience helps everyone here. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week I am covering the specific foods that actively damage liver function even when people think they are eating healthily. Some of them will surprise you. I am Ethan Corvin, a health educator and cardiovascular research communicator. I will see you next week.